Hi, folks. Welcome to the Retrospective. This is a podcast for engineering managers, and I'm your co-host, Jeremy, and alongside me, I have Peter.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Peter. What are we going to talk about today?
The topic I wanted to cover today was about senior software engineers, or rather, what makes them senior? What is the characteristic of the senior software engineer? And the reason I wanted to talk about it is because I think a lot of people focus on seniority, and I don't think it's about years of experience, but rather kind of complex mix of behaviors that bring it all together.
Cool. Okay, if this is a quiz show or something, how do you define senior engineer in one sentence?
Yeah, so this is this bit I had to think about a lot, and I tried to come up with a single sentence. I'm going to try and read it, but then
Good
I think
luck.
we're going to unpack it a little bit in the rest of the episode. I would say that a senior engineer combines technical expertise with business understanding and leadership skills. They improve code quality and, most importantly, the outcomes of a team. In a way, I think of that as like a multiplier of the team, like a manager is a multiplier of a team, but really focusing much more on the technical and the results part of the team. That's how I would summarize it.
Okay, so just that I understand well, you mean technical expertise, team impact, business awareness, and leadership behavior.
Leadership and
Basically,
behavior, yeah.
those are the four main areas. Do you
Yeah.
think these are in order, like, or let's not get into which
That's
one is
really
more
interesting.
important?
I think I had the technical part because that is where everybody focuses when it comes to the senior role. I think the technical part is just a basic foundation, and even that technical part, I would define. We'll dive into that in a second, but I would explode that apart a little bit more. Another way to think about seniority of roles is the time horizon that they operate on and think about, or an analogy, because we've been doing a little bit of gardening this week, and for the first time, I'm living in a house with a garden, and I've done a year now in the same house. Is that as a gardener, you take care of the weeds, but you think about when I'm going to be pruning the plants and what season and everything else, but you're also needing to plan several seasons ahead of how things are going to grow and grow in your garden. And I think that's what a senior engineer does. They're not just focused on the here and now and the tactical, but they've got a part of how they operate and think is looking on a time horizon that is further ahead. In fact, I think that's actually when we look at engineering manager and a manager of managers, and then the kind of managing a wider department, the horizons or the levels that you zoom up and down on are also in that same kind of way. You're thinking less tactically and more strategically and in the future. And I think that applies to the senior level. It's that first level where you're thinking beyond just the immediate tasks that the team need to do.
I really like this analogy. It explains the time horizon really well. I also like this analogy because it explains also the more holistic view that I expect from a senior engineer.
Mm-hmm.
In a garden, you don't just have grass, or you don't just have vegetables, or you don't just have a fruit tree. You have a lot of stuff that are interacting with each other and have impact on others. And I think this translates well to the engineering profession, that the code that you're responsible for is not living in a vacuum. It's interacting with other teams' products or externally with third parties and users. Yeah, this gardener attitude or analogy, I think it works really well. Okay.
Yeah, like just to give an example, in the house that we live in at the moment, the people, I guess the landscaper that initially designed the garden, designed it so that we always have some flowers or plants in bloom at every season
That's
of
really
the year.
nice. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That
And
shows
I think
expertise.
that's exactly, and it's, and in it, the way that each plant, the way they're organized in the disposition of where the sun hits at different seasons and so on. So yeah, like right now we have a feijoa tree, which is a kind of a guava from South America, if I'm not mistaken. And
Today.
the fruit is now starting, and it's delicious. So yeah, that's
Nice.
what senior engineers do. There's a bit of delight to it, I guess.
Oh yeah, and I mean, I don't want to stick to this analogy too long, but it's also good because the impact of a professional like the landscaper or a senior engineer is not immediately obvious. Like, and I think that's typical, that Well, things just seem to be going very smooth, then maybe someone very senior, very experienced was working behind the scenes on that.
Yeah, and I have a good example. Like I think the first time where I really saw this senior kind of role stand out, I was on a project at Accenture. It was when I was early in my career. There was like over 100 people on the project. It's probably like 40 engineers or developers working on it. And the project seemed to be okay, but there was a guy that I worked with and for who started to see that the architecture that we had wasn't really going to work. And and we were actually quite far into the coding stage. And it was amazing to see how he started to identify that. Then I mean, I worked very closely with him. I actually built a model to mathematically prove that the architecture wouldn't work. Before I knew it actually was related to theory of constraints and how we were trying to process events essentially. And I loved how he was able to very smoothly coordinate a very big pivot in the architecture without actually much impact to the overall project delivery. And it's just really interesting how that smooth leadership of someone senior who really knows what they're doing. And he was able to coach me and mentor me in all of that to enable me to grow so that I could learn from that and be able to do that in the future. That's what I think someone does. They just de-risk the whole operation of what you're doing. Like they take out the risk.
That's a great example. And that's a great summary of their scheme. But let's start to jump into these four aspects that we
Mm,
mentioned in the beginning and start with maybe the most obvious, the technical expertise.
mm.
I would even say that maybe this is the easiest for someone to gain experience in. Can you explain briefly what do you think, what technical qualities define a senior engineer?
Yeah, I think this is the easy one, right? This is the one that everyone's focused on. Maintainable code, making good architectural choices, not overbuilding things, which is a trap.
Okay.
At the same time, not underbuilding things. It's like there's a double-edged sword to that. Having a deep systems understanding of how the systems hang together. In fact, goes along with jumping into a new code base and very quickly being able to navigate and understand it. I think the two
Mm,
go well together. When you have a difficult problem to solve, usually the first solutions tend to be quite complex and hard for people to
mhm.
understand. And you have to iterate through that to get to something simple that brings clarity. And that's another key part that an engineer who's senior can do is they can take you to the other side of that simple solution.
Yeah,
Um,
I love this summary. I would add one word, pragmatic. I really like this word because it shows that you get something done, but it rules out all the over engineering or under engineering options. So I really like the pragmatic word, and that's
I
what I
love it.
tell people when they want to grow or what they're expecting. Good. Okay, so this is the easy one. I would say let's move on to the second one, which is team impact. How do senior engineers improve their teams?
Yeah, so this is the bit where I think you're not just brilliant individually, but you're a multiplier, like we expect managers to be multipliers of their team. You're a multiplier of your team's productivity. And that means, I think, let's start with the basic where people start on the senior and they focus on, which is teaching and mentoring. That is something that I expect senior people to be able to do. And in fact, we need to create an environment where they have a mix of people in the team so that you can do that, right? Otherwise, maybe folks kind of stagnate. But it goes beyond that. It's focusing on the bottlenecks. I think modeling how to do things as well, writing clear documentation. I think that is, again, I think this is still like focusing a lot on the basics, which we mostly cover in what a senior does. I have a story of an anti-pattern.
I
Um,
love this. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, very early in my career, I worked in a team where I worked with one of the most brilliant in terms of technically competent engineers I've ever worked with. But he was somewhere on the spectrum. I don't know exactly. So he was the technical lead for the team. Basically, he worked mostly on his own, criticized everyone else, rewrote your code. Like
Mm.
you would do something and he would rewrite it. Everything was way more complicated. And honestly, I never really learned from him. I learned from other people in the team. I learned from my manager and how they coached me. But I just really found that when he explained things to me, it was hard for me to access a lot of the kind of, it was just too complicated. And actually other people found simpler ways. And it's funny because from that experience, I ended up I was working on Symbian OS, which is a very complicated operating system, embedded operating system. And because I learned how to do the simple concepts, I actually built some training courses for Symbian that I ended up teaching
Yeah.
from it. But honestly, it wasn't from him. And that's a shame because it's probably like one of the best engineers on Symbian.
Yeah, I really love this story. I have a quote which I'm gonna paraphrase is that, and I don't remember who is it from. I'm sorry, that superstar engineers, they think they are creating a culture of excellence, but in reality, they create a culture of fear. And I think this is coming through from your story also, which is a great anti-pattern. If you have a very experienced engineer who's going in and writing, fixing your code instead of you not teaching you how to do stuff, it just stifles all kind of innovation and all kind of work because everyone is paralyzed that they're just going to make a mistake and they're going to get humiliated and corrected. So the team impact is what matters at the end of the day and not individual impact. So if somebody can positively impact the team, that's a senior behavior, I think.
Yeah, I think so. At least for me, the scope of senior sits mostly within the team and into the boundaries of other teams. And when we look at maybe more senior roles like staff and so on, we're looking at a wider radius of influence and impact. But maybe that's a separate, a whole separate episode of
That's
the
the rabbit
podcast.
hole we are not walking into. Cool. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Being mindful of that. I think we explained really well what we mean by team impact and why it's important. Let's move on to the third aspect, business awareness.
Mm.
How do senior engineers handle the business side? Do they even have to?
Yeah. Some so-called senior people I've worked with really are still in the mode of feed me to the product manager, feed me the stories and what you want and your requirements. And then I'll turn that into the technical implementation.
Yeah.
And I think that really great senior or I think for me, my personal bar for senior is that they are very close to the user. They are seeking and pushing to be seeing the user using their software. They're modeling that to the team and they understand the business context. If it's financial software, they understand it deeply or they learn how to learn the business context. And often, I mean, over your career, you might work in different fields, but you should be able to quickly come up to speed with the business problem. And then it's about converting the business problems into solutions. And I really think the criteria for making a decision is based on the impact you can have on the business and always linking that back. And personally, I like to equate that to outcomes, which is a change in human behavior that is linked to business results. So it's thinking about that human always and the behavior change. Sometimes that means smaller, simpler solutions. And I think this is about business value and always having your milestones and your deliverables focused on that and not just on a kind of like an endless implementation. And actually the great senior people are willing to stop even though they know that they could keep going because they reached the outcome that we were aiming for, the value we're aiming for, and they don't let these projects run forever and forever.
Yeah. I mean, they are pragmatic.
Pragmatic, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a story also for this being aware of the product that you're working on and using this information in your architectural decisions. Back when I was working at Gawker, we were working on an in-house CMS. And in a startup phase, features are frequently changing. We were trying to figure out how commenting should work, what kind of metadata we should store on posts. And this resulted in frequent database structure changes, which is a very costly operation. So there was the idea from an engineer to all this metadata, especially new experimental stuff, which is just serialize it and store in protocol buffers. So we just didn't care about all the structure. We just serialized whatever data we wanted to store. Maybe some old posts didn't have or old content didn't have all the new data, but we could handle that in the code. So as a result, we had a very flexible system that could immediately try out new experiments from the product team, and yeah, still a very robust, scalable architecture that could serve the hundreds of millions of users our sites were serving. So this is the kind of thinking, like this is not something a product manager is going to come with to say, write in a ticket that
No.
you should actually serialize all this metadata and store it
Mhm.
like that. And this requires a very strong collaboration between product and
Yeah,
engineering.
that example couples this technical expertise and understanding what is possible with technology and being on top of all the other potential technical tools that are out there, and then
Exactly.
picking the right tool for this particular context. It's a real skill. Yeah.
And what makes it really hard is that you need to sacrifice something. In our case, we needed to sacrifice some kind of search performance, because if you have serialized data, you need to create and maintain indexes, or you just give up being able to search on some of these. But we realized it's okay. Like this was
Mhm.
not a critical feature, and what we gained was more important. But oftentimes, less senior engineers they got stuck at this point, and they cannot sacrifice one of the features of their systems easily.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let's move on to the final aspect, which is maybe the most ambiguous and was that I found that people struggle with often is leadership. What is leadership, and what kind of behaviors stand out
Mm.
from senior engineers in your point of view?
Yeah, and I think there's actually two parts to this. One is your kind of general behavior, and then there's the leadership aspect. So for me, the general behavior is about ownership, taking ownership and responsibility for your projects, having like a learning mindset, and actually more than anything else. And this is when you take responsibility for projects, it's not micromanaging other people, but it's fostering that growth mindset in other people. It's finding that balance, going back to that point about mentoring, growing others. But I do think ultimately the ownership goes beyond I'm the lead on this to that de-risking of the whole thing. It's about knowing when to ask for help, knowing how to ask for help. I think like it's the first thing like towards your senior journey is like knowing how to ask for help and knowing and not being stuck. The worst is that getting out of what you see junior people doing is being stuck and not asking for help. Senior people don't do
Yes.
that. There's a whole aspect of tech debt, managing legacy code, like having like a way of doing that, which isn't super religious and we need to get rid of all of this, but having this, going back to your pragmatic word, having a pragmatic way to do it. And I think also, look, honestly, the behavior, when we talk about behavior, there's conflicts and how you manage conflict, picking battles and not just going after every little point because, these are smart people and you can have like religious debates about lots of things, but it's really picking what is important and what's important for the business or the ability to deliver a de-risking the system rather than just being on a crusade over everything. Essentially, someone who's really refreshingly positive in the environment rather than constantly negative and dragging you down.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with the positivity aspect, but I think it can be a controversial one. I see some of the engineers saying that I'm not negative, I'm just realistic, and that is the most gloomy picture of the future possible. Yeah, but I agree that this is mature professional behavior, what you just described. What about the other part of this point, the leadership skills that you mentioned?
Yeah. So for me, leadership is influencing and bringing other people along with you. And, or one aspect of leadership, maybe.
No, I love
But
this. Actually,
yeah,
there is a definition saying that leadership is influencing without the title.
yeah,
And I really like that, because a lot of people are insisting on the title before they start. They think the title comes first, but actually I think it's the other way around.
I always think you need to be showing it before you get the title.
Yeah.
So I think it's obviously, I mentioned this before, but you model the right things, like you lead by example. I think figuring out how to get agreement within a team, which isn't always consensus, but it is managing the disagreement and managing that. All of this is tied to communication skills. I think this is just so crucial in leadership is clarity, communication. How can you bring people along with you and influence people if you can't communicate? Frankly, for me, I think that's also isn't just about spoken communication, but also about how you write, how you message on Slack or chat, your written communication, the documents you produce, not overly verbose, whatever, but really like very bringing people along with you And another aspect of it is just the way that you communicate technical topics, both to the team, but also to the stakeholders and the engineering manager, the product manager who may be less technical, but really the ability to express complicated things in clear and simple ways that people understand, so that when you say, going back to your point earlier about our platform is in trouble and it has these issues, people understand why you're saying it, and they can make, and you can create space to actually address those topics and not just be doom and gloom.
Okay, so that's a good summary. Maybe before we summarize everything on the topic, because we are running long as usual, what would you advise to an engineering manager, arguably our target audience, who has someone on their team who's on nearing the senior level? How should they approach this challenge?
The first thing I would say is that a lot of people in that situation think about it in terms of time. And I think we need to adjust junior people's expectations on the time. Secondly, I think there's obviously an evaluation that you need to do between yourself and them. Should be really driven by them. And all of this is driven by them. It's not like you're going to make them do this. It's a key thing is that they need to know, you need to help them know what they need to do, and then they need to act and own their own career. You and I, Peter, I think are both deeply aligned on the strengths-based approach, which is focus on your strengths. No matter your personality, I think you can achieve what we described here through your strengths. There's very little return focusing on someone's weakness. So find the compensating strengths. Also, time is needed simply to be able to have enough situations to try and learn and build out that experience. And obviously, that's the main thing for me is just then as a manager, if you're helping them, is help them have more of those opportunities to demonstrate to give them that big project and have a mentor that goes along with them and use that task relevance, maturity kind of scale in different parts of what they're doing to adjust your level of coaching, I would say.
Okay, I like this approach and staying on the time aspect because, as you said, a lot of people focus on that. How do you react if you're a manager of someone who's very ambitious, saying that, look, there are these 4 aspects that you mentioned half a year ago. These are 3 examples for every aspect that I've been displaying the expected behavior in the last 3 months. When is my promotion coming? What do you say to that?
If they're really, so I'm assuming in your scenario, they're not like fully there yet.
I mean, arguably, let's just say they are there since the last week. So where I'm stretching this example is the point that there is some time aspect that's necessary. As you were saying, not enough opportunities maybe, but where is that timeline? What is realistic for someone to get promoted to the senior level?
Yeah, so that's the important part, I think, about what we just described. It's not a one-off demonstration. I think you need to demonstrate a sustained period of time, all of these characteristics. And so it does take time to get to what I call a true senior level. Now, in some companies, they might have already called you senior, but you're not ticking all these boxes. And that's just how some companies do things. But personally, for me, it needs to be sustained over a significant period of time. And that's the expectation we should set. We should be very encouraging of that person, say, you're starting to show everything that we talked about. This is brilliant. Now, let's try and find you more examples so you can really nail this down over the next year.
Yeah, I love this kind of messaging because it focuses on what good looks like and giving positive reinforcing feedback about the behavior we want to see. And at the same time, paints a good picture for the future about how to get there.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's a balancing act, Peter, right? In some situations, this is someone who you can really see their trajectory. It's just one way, it's going brilliantly. I think in some of those scenarios, and depending on a lot of things in the environment and so on, it may be okay to put them up for a promotion at that point, especially if the promotion is a few months away and you have to prepare a whole bunch of things. But in some other cases, it's not. Like, the key thing to avoid is if the person you're managing is in a kind of like a quick fix, I don't know if they've just ticked it and they're a bit shaky or whatever. Just just you need to readjust their expectations.
I like to say in these cases is to make sure that the person is aware that once they get the promotion, they are level 2 in the game. Like the expectations are much higher for them on everyday work. So even if they had a very successful few weeks or something, they need to know that this is going to be the baseline in the future, in the next level.
Exactly. And if they're struggling or if it's a major effort for them, then they could soon find themselves on a performance improvement plan, which is terrifying because you have one person who was projecting themselves forward, promotion, and then suddenly they're not performing well. So that is why and this is what good performance management requires.
Yeah, they should be comfortably performing on this level before they get promoted.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. I think we did a very good short overview of this topic. So just to summarize, I get your points well, that being a senior engineer, it's really not just about time. It requires technical expertise, team impact, business awareness, and the leadership and behavior requirements we were talking about. So these four aspects that put together senior engineering.
Yeah. They make their teams better. They reduce complexity. They de-risk things, and they're able to dive onto complex topics. Yeah, I think so much more to talk about. I would love to hear people's feedback on this format and on the topic. Is there something that you feel strongly about on a senior?
Or if you have a topic that you think we should cover in one of our shows, then reach out to us.
Exactly. Well, folks, thank you very much for listening to us and to the retrospective. If this is useful, the best thing that you can do is just share it. And if you like it, I don't know, the podcasting is a little bit harder to do likes and all the rest, but the biggest thing for us is literally share it or tell us, honestly, tell us that you liked it. Yeah. With
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yeah. Have a great week.
See you in 2 weeks.